we want to tell you a story. But you're going to have to take it with a grain of salt. After Jaws 2 became the highest-grossing sequel of all time, producers David Brown and Richard Zanuck were trying to figure out how they could keep making Jaws movies without straining the audience's suspension of disbelief. Once they saw the massive success of the hit spoof Airplane, they felt that the best route to take was to make a send-up about a film crew that's trying to shoot a new Jaws movie, and in the process, they find themselves being attacked by an actual shark. Given the cheeky title of Jaws 3, People Zero, the movie would have brought together the talents of National Lampoon publisher Maddie Simmons as producer, iconic 80s filmmaker John Hughes as one of the screenwriters, and Piranha's own Joe Dante as director. Richard Dreyfuss and Bo Derek were even slated to star. It seemed like comedic lightning in a bottle. Obviously, that didn't happen. According to Simmons, Steven Spielberg threatened Universal chairman Sid Sheinberg that he'd leave the studio if the movie was made. Maybe this was because the script poked fun at a thinly veiled parody of Spielberg. Whether it's because of that or the producers getting cold feet with taking the series into full-blown comedy, Jaws 3 People Zero never surfaced. After that fell apart, Zanuck and Brown decided to leave the franchise.
And that's all she wrote on Jaws 3 People Zero. Universal moved on without Zanuck and Brown. They assigned a different team of producers to the sequel and decided on what they thought was a safer approach. This kind of thing happens all the time during the Hollywood development process. So why are we still talking about Jaws 3 People Zero? It doesn't exist. The screenplay is out there, but it's just a document. It's not like Jaws 2, where Universal actually started shooting a now abandoned version of the film with a different director. Jaws 3 People Zero was merely a stepping stone on the way to Jaws 3D. But in the case of Jaws 3D, you can hardly bring it up without someone chiming in about this spoof or the infamous Jaws the Revenge. So why is it no one wants to talk about Jaws 3D?
I'm Drew Deitch.
I'm Travis Newton, and if we can't make it fun to talk about Jaws 3D, then we're doing something wrong.
So put on your 3D glasses. It's time to come face to face with Jaws 3D on the Season 2 premiere of Finflix. Welcome aboard.
We'll dive into the deep blue sea and pray that we don't drown. And we'll come up for air cause we've had quite a scare 47 meters down. We'll find the last shark and we will leave our mark wherever our journey may go. And as much as we fight, we must take a bite out of every Sharknado. Be it orca or piranha, Lake Placid or the beast. No fin flick will escape us till we've had our chance to feast.
And welcome back, everyone, to Finflix. Yes, we are back, and we are starting things off with Jaws 3D. This seems to be the one Jaws movie nobody wants to talk about.
So many times in conversation when you bring this up, people inevitably want to talk about this abandoned spoof, but there's this movie that we have that made enough money that Universal thought it should warrant a sequel, but it also made enough of a negative impact in Universal's eyes that they should change their game plan and do Jaws the Revenge. So what happened? What is the deal with Jaws 3D?
Well, there's definitely a lot of context that we need to bring to the table because we don't have the best documentation as to how this came to be, but it is important that this was during that period of the early to mid 80s when 3D was being used as a gimmick to help boost ticket sales. And Jaws 3 was put into this box of, all right, we need to make it a fun 3D gimmicky movie. It's telling that only a year before Jaws 3D came out, Friday the 13th Part 3 3D came out and made a ton of money and was shot, like most of the Friday the 13th movies, very, very cheaply. So my speculation is that somebody at Universal that was in charge of the Jaws franchise said, this little movie from Paramount made all of this money from 3D. Let's do that with our big, prestigious Jaws franchise. And I think it's a really interesting approach to take with the Jaws franchise because I feel like Jaws 3D is the only entry in the series that goes a strange direction as far as trying to be kind of cartoonish and poppy.
It abandons any sense of prestige that any of the other entries might have. Like Jaws 2, a lot of people knocked Jaws 2 for being sort of a cheaper, less effective version of the first movie. And in some ways they're right. But Jeannot Schwark, the director of Jaws 2, the guy who they brought on to direct it after the production fell apart the first time, he was no hack. He directs things really, really well. It's a very well shot movie. There's good acting happening in Jaws 2. So there is a sense of like real drama taking place and the film taking it seriously. Jaws 3D? None of that. And I don't believe the film has any sort of delusions about what it is. It knows exactly what it is. And the primary goal of it all was to be a 3D gag horror movie.
That is evident from the very get-go of the movie. The title, Jaws 3D, shoots out at the audience and turns into a pair of jaws and chomps itself. I won't lie, I kind of love that type of stupid.
That title, I think, is a pretty cheeky way to start the film. But I got to say, the opening of the flick is pretty effective in 3D. That footage of all the little reef fish swimming around in 3D is really cool. It's very immersive.
Before even the title, we get a grouper getting crunched with a nice sound effect on the soundtrack, and then its disembodied head floating directly in the camera and blubbing a little bit.
Yeah, it's really bloody and delightfully dumb. We're also hearing the score for the first time. This is the first time John Williams did not score a Jaws film. This was done instead by a guy named Alan Parker. And the score for Jaws 3 is okay. I mean, you listen to the music by itself, and it's pretty well composed. But having the new theme take precedence over the original Williams motifs is a little jarring, I think.
I like that the score is mostly doing its own thing. It's not resting on the laurels of John Williams' theme. The theme is there. Sometimes, though, I think the score is really busy. Even in these opening titles, the classic Jaws motif is playing underneath all of this new score. It seems a little overloaded.
It definitely is trying to be a new spin on what it is. And when we say the Jaws theme, really what we're talking about is the basic two-note motif. Dun, 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 dun. The rest of that theme that Williams had done throughout his work on Jaws and Jaws 2 isn't present anymore. It's just that basic two-note thing, and then Alan Parker pretty much does whatever he wants over it. Right after this opening with the reef fish and the grouper getting its head chomped off, we cut to a scene of a whole bunch of water skiers in fantastic formation. The score is blaring this really bright, happy music, and the 3D for the water skier stuff really is like the best 3D stuff in the movie because it's not shot straight on. It's shot on at a nice angle, so you get a good sense of not only dimension, but depth as well. It's fun, and it immediately sets that kind of tone for the movie, and that it's like, oh, okay, it's a goofy water skier movie.
Well, that's what's so interesting is that if Jaws 2 was already kind of unwittingly falling into a slasher mold, Jaws 3 realizes that it's living in a post-Friday the 13th world and embraces that, but less as a structure or framework and more in its tone, and I would even say it's kind of textural elements. Like, this looks like a slasher movie from the 80s as far as everybody being dressed in really bizarre, bright colors. And of course, the excuse that you can make for this is that it all takes place at SeaWorld and it's, very colorful uniforms that everybody has to wear. But I feel like the entire costuming and art direction of this movie is very, very strikingly 80s.
It is very strikingly 80s. It was released in 83, and the aesthetic of the film is, in two words, utterly bizarre. Sorry, I had to qualify that because so much of the film is 3D gags. The shot composition is weirdly flat. Like they tend to shoot things straight on so that objects in the frame will point directly out at the audience. Like they don't want to have that sort of sense of depth and dimension in the space. They just want stuff to shoot out at the audience to create that gag. And then the actual art design of the movie around all of these elements is, like you said, like weirdly colorful. Like I don't even know if SeaWorld really looked like that at the time.
Well, so this sets up where the movie's going to take place in SeaWorld. And the actual structure of the movie is that Michael Brody, the son of Martin Brody from the first two films,
The older son.
has become, I guess, an engineer.
He's like a contractor. He does construction, welding, that kind of stuff. He builds things.
Right, and he is working at SeaWorld. Michael is played by Dennis Quaid.
Mm-hmm.
Michael's girlfriend is played by Bess Armstrong. Her character's name is Kay, and I believe she directly works with the two performing dolphins, Cindy and Sandy. But she also seems to just be kind of like a resident marine biologist or something.
She does a lot of stuff. She has kind of a versatile role there.
She wears many different swimming caps.
She and Michael are both on contract with SeaWorld, and there is some talk about like when their contracts are going to expire and what they're going to do next, yada yada. The movie actually spends kind of a surprising amount of time talking about their relationship and the mechanics of like how are they going to be together and do they want to be together when one of them has to inevitably move away and so on and so forth. If the movie has any dramatic core, that's it.
I think this is a good point to bring up that the script was originally written by genre master Richard Matheson and later rewritten by Carl Gottlieb, who has kind of been the steward of the Jaws franchise up to this point. He famously was doing a lot of rewrites while they were shooting the original Jaws. And Matheson's original script, which is also out there if you want to look for it, it's clear that his big idea is setting it at a water park, and I can't help but believe that it's Matheson's interest to kind of satirize elements of this water park place, and there's some of that lingering in the finished film, but I don't think any of it is really intentional, because obviously they were filming at the real SeaWorld, and I'm sure SeaWorld was fronting a huge part of the bill for this movie, because there's about maybe 30% of this movie that acts as just a direct commercial for SeaWorld.
Sure. I mean, it would have affected the operations of the park in a big way because it would have interrupted the daily operations of the park to shoot on location there. Not everything was shot on location at SeaWorld, obviously, but there is a significant chunk of the stuff that was shot in the park proper. And you get the sense that SeaWorld, if they're going to cut them a deal for, being an advertisement for SeaWorld, it's like, well, do we really want to have that be this movie where a shark is allowed to break in and eat everybody? It's also a weird thing where this movie says that SeaWorld is connected to the ocean, and it is very much not. It is very much landlocked in Orlando.
Yeah, this is definitely a fantasy SeaWorld. But we do get to meet the person who's running this fantasy version of SeaWorld, Calvin Bouchard, played by Louis Gossett Jr., and there's just no way that he is not the best thing about the movie.
Yeah, he overshadows pretty much any other performance in the film by just totally embracing the ham aspect of Calvin Bouchard. Like, he's a showman. There's some allusions in dialogue that he's had a, quote, colorful past, so maybe he's not the best at running SeaWorld. And it definitely comes to light that, yeah, he's probably not the best guy to be running the show.
No, and we'll talk about him later because he absolutely has the best line in the movie.
He has the best lines, plural, in the movie.
But I since we're focusing so much on the cast, I'll say this. I think this film is actually pretty well cast. I don't think there's a huge weak link in the cast, except, surprisingly, Dennis Quaid.
He's kind of sleepwalking through the role.
I think he's dangerously close to being a bland Danny.
Well, the character is written as a bland Danny. I mean, I like Dennis Quaid as an actor.
Oh, me too.
But Mike Brody in this film is just... It was almost like he was retrofitted to be the character from the first two movies.
Yeah, there is a part of me that thinks that maybe at this point there shouldn't have been any connection to the previous films, because eventually Sean, the younger brother, does come into play. And like you're saying, the way that these characters are written, they don't have to be the Brody kids. They could be anybody.
Right. I mean, there is talk of like, oh, this thing happened to us when we were kids, but it really doesn't have any sort of effect on the goings on in the film. Sean Brody, the younger brother who has been going to college in Colorado, and then they say basically like, oh, he moved to Colorado to get away from the ocean because he's so scared of the ocean. I would be too if what had happened in Jaws 2 happened to me when I was a kid.
Sure. Jaws 3 is kind of playing the soft reboot card a bit here, in that it's being very coy as to whether or not it's acknowledging the existence of Jaws 2. I think it's trying not to, but it works that you could connect Jaws 2 to this movie. But I think it's very clear, even from the marketing at the time, that they were trying to distance themselves and really be like, this is its own brand new thing.
Right. Well, it was called Jaws 3D, but they didn't want people to think that it was just a 3D redo of the original Jaws. So even on posters, you'll see like, it's an all new movie. Like they had to qualify. They had to tell people like all new, it says right up there next to the shark's nose above the, above the water skiers. It's a great poster. I love that poster.
Yeah, I do love the poster. Another character that becomes incredibly important to the plot that we have to talk about is Shelby Overman.
Is he all that important to the plot? I mean, he's only alive for about a minute and a half. He's this big, tan, muscly dude who works for Dennis Quaid's character. And in the beginning of the movie, he is closing the gate that leads from the ocean into the park. And as he's working on that gate, he is chomped by a shark. And we get the first real big 3D human gore gag of the flick where his severed arm is floating in the water and the broken humerus is poking out of the arm toward the audience, very, very sharp. And it's such an oddly composed shot. I gotta say, Joe Alves, the director of the film, who was, the production designer on Jaws 1 and 2, and then also did second unit direction, the guy did not have a talent for direction. I'm sorry to say. It's also his only directing credit.
This is his only directing credit. I don't envy him because these 3D cameras that they were using at the time were notoriously cumbersome and incredibly difficult. It was more important about making the 3D work than it was actually making good shot compositions. Mm-hmm. So I have a lot of sympathy for him. I will say, though, that there is a moment when Overman is about to go down and fix the cage where he's standing on top of it. And it's this silhouetted shot during, like sunset. And I'm like, that's a pretty good shot.
And it looks even better in 3D. There's an odd thing that happened when I watched this film in 3D is that a lot of the shot compositions started to make way more sense to me because I thought this was a really ugly movie beforehand. I still think it's a pretty ugly flick with poorly composed shots. Characters don't have adequate headroom in their shots all the time. It's really annoying. But that shot looking out over the sunset is one of the times where I went, oh, it's clicking. Like, this is why they did this way, because it looks incredible, especially in 3D. Like, Jaws 3D, I think, is a much better movie than Jaws 3.
No, that's a good way to put it. So we continue at once Sean comes in and is palling around with Michael. Eventually, they're hanging out in a bar at the park or something. And one of the skiers is playing a game called Standoff, where they're just stand there and put your palms against each other's, two people, and you're trying to push the other person over. And the skier is played by Lea Thompson.
If you don't know who we're talking about, it is the mom from Back to the Future.
She is so angelic and immediately lights up the screen. And obviously this came out before Back to the Future. If I was somebody watching this thinking, okay, who's going to really take off after this movie? It would be Lea Thompson.
If only because she's just so radiant. I mean, she's just gorgeous in the movie. And that's probably the reason why she was cast, is that she just kind of embodies this role of the bikini wearing water skier. And she's certainly charming in the film. She gets these first few scenes where she's hanging out with Sean Brody. He plays her in Standoff. He actually manages to win in Standoff by saying, "My fly is open." Of course, this breaks her concentration, and she looks down, and he manages to push her over. And so, of course, instant romance.
The actor who plays Sean, his name is John Putch.
Putch.
I don't know. Whatever it is, he is so tired this entire movie. And, I said the thing about Dennis Quaid being the weak link. It's because Michael should be a really important character. Not that Sean shouldn't, but it's clear in the way that he's structuring this that he may as well be a Crystal Lake camp counselor.
Yeah, well, I mean, they build up something interesting, and it's like Sean was the one that was affected more greatly by the shark attacks in his youth. And so he's the one that harbors a greater fear of sharks, doesn't like to be around water. There are scenes where Lea Thompson's character is trying to get him to go in the water and he won't do it. So it's like, okay, you're setting up these things about this character, and then the movie simply abandons him.
You're talking about the scene where Kellyanne, she gets him to go into the water. Michael and Kay see this and they're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe it. She got him in the water and they're making out. But what's actually happening is that there's another scene going on.
Oh, I hate this whole sequence. For some incalculable reason, they intercut the whole, like, getting to know you stuff at the bar after the game is standoff. And then there's this big long scene where Dennis Quaid and Bess Armstrong are on the beach talking about, oh, my future, this is my contract. And then Sean Brody and this water ski are playing kissy face on the shore of the lagoon. Then they start intercutting that sort of stuff with this scene of these two dudes who are dressed in like black wetsuits with like black beanies on, clearly trying not to be seen, speaking in very harsh whispers with one another. Their dialogue is almost entirely unintelligible. So it's these two guys with an inflatable rowboat going,
there are these two crooks who are going out into the lagoon of SeaWorld, and they're going to, I guess, steal some coral because one of the guys says a guy in Miami will pay us $200 for the good stuff, which I don't know what the good stuff is.
I guess they're keeping the stuff in the fictional lagoon at SeaWorld.
So here's the thing. As soon as these guys come up and they're doing this, we're like, well, these guys are shark chow.
Right, because the cutting back and forth does really nothing to ratchet up the tension. Like the two scenes, it's not important for them to take place simultaneously or to feel that feeling of simultaneity.
It makes me feel like the raft sequence with these crooks was like a reshoot. I'm not saying that it was, but it feels like it because it's like it's not interacting with anything else that's going on in the scene. It also looks super cheap.
The one good thing that happens in this sequence is we see the one dude who's underwater. We see his flashlight get snuffed out because he gets chomped by the shark.
We're from the perspective of the other guy up in the raft, and we can see him looking down into the water, and we see the flashlight under the water, and then it just blacks out. It's like, that is a cool, creepy idea. That's all this scene has to offer. The other guy falls in, and I guess he gets chomped, and then the raft just pops, and that's it. These bodies aren't discovered later or anything. It's completely useless.
Meanwhile, our main cast of doofuses is yelling at each other with a megaphone on the shore of the lagoon, I guess somewhere else on the shore of the same lagoon where all this stuff is happening. What I think was the problem was that all these scenes back to back to back of the main cast sort of getting to know one another, I think they felt that the shark wasn't present enough. They thought basically that the movie was getting boring. So in order to alleviate that, they intercut that attack scene with the getting to know you stuff.
Well, then, of course, the next day, Shelby Overman's girlfriend, who worked at the bar they were at, comes up to Michael, and they don't know at this point that he's dead. And she believes that Overman is cheating on her and has one of the most confounding and memorable lines. She says to Michael, "You tell Shelby Overman for me he can take a flying leap at a rolling donut on a gravel driveway." Ugh, what a mouthful of a line.
Poetry. I think Charlene, the barmaid, really reads that with gusto.
With as much conviction as any human being could possibly read that line.
So while all this is going on, there's a big event happening at SeaWorld. They're opening up a new attraction in the lagoon that has all these tunnels with, plexiglass walls that people can go walk around in. There's like a scare zone that has like a fake moray eel that'll pop out of the wall. And they're doing a grand opening for this. And so Louis Gossett Jr.'s character is busy hyping it up. And then they bring in this renowned wildlife photographer, a guy named Philip Fitzroyce.
Mr. Philip Fitzroyce.
Philip Fitzroyce is a dandy English airhead. I mean, a real idiot. And he brings with him his manservant, Jack. Now that all these sort of players are in place, the Shark Attack movie can sort of happen as it should.
Once Michael learns that Overman still hasn't shown up, he and Kay take a mini sub to search the lagoon because they're like, well, he's probably dead. We should search for his body.
They do find a spooky skeleton.
Yeah, they call him Oscar.
I think we win the Guinness Award for the longest continuous shot of a skeleton in 3D in cinematic history. That shot lasts so long. It's odd. You actually see that trend throughout the rest of the film. The movie doesn't do a whole lot of cutting back and forth rapidly, probably because it's a 3D film. They wanted to get stuff in a single take as much as they could.
Well, and I would imagine cutting too many images, back and forth in 3D would just be way too jarring to the audience.
I remember Michael Bay talking about that when he he did his first Transformers in 3D, I think it was the third one, Dark of the Moon, he talked about having to change his style to suit the 3D format. And that was like, okay, we can't cut as much as we do. Jaws 3D takes that same approach of just letting shots last longer.
Including a really bad composite shot of the mini-sub passing by the control center window.
The score treats that shot like it's Star Trek the Motion Picture. You know?
Yep. Like all the tech stuff with the sub is kind of soft sci-fi, the undersea attraction, the undersea kingdom, then having this basically bridge of the Enterprise control center. All of this is really cool. And then putting a shark among a modern man-made structure and having it tear that down is kind of a good big picture idea.
It is. There is sort of an optimistic futurism to Jaws 3D, which is odd because normally we see movies like this, you know, think about Jurassic World, which follows kind of a similar template. Mm-hmm. It's a creature on the rampage loose in a theme park.
I think Jurassic World owes way more than anyone wants to admit to Jaws 3.
The parallels are pretty obvious, but that movie at least has a few satirical elements to it. In Jaws 3D, there's really no sort of satire making fun of this whole endeavor, which is a sham.
Well, and that's what's unfortunate. Maybe that's more present in the Matheson draft, is that there's a chance for good commentary here, especially about keeping sea creatures in captivity, because this is when we finally get introduced to the shark. So we think there is a shark that attacks Michael and Kay when they get out of their sub and are searching the sunken ship attraction.
Bizarrely, this sequence is almost recreated exactly in Jaws the Revenge.
That's true. That's a good point. And I guess we can step into our first segment, which is the mindless eating machine, because we have our first shark puppet show up, and whoo, buddy, this shark puppet, to say it has limited range of motion is being too kind. It is pretty much a rigid, I imagine it's just on a pole that someone's shoving in and out of frame. It has no articulation in the mouth.
This is the rammer, basically.
The rammer, yeah.
They used this ramming rig to punch a hole in the side of the shipwreck that was on the bottom of the lagoon, this fake shipwreck. And it's not articulated at all. The shark just goes poke in and out. And then later, it's chasing Kay and Michael as they're trying to get out of the lagoon. And it runs face first into like a underwater chain link fence gate. And you see its nose like smush.
Yeah, it's hard boop.
They really towed that some hard.
Yeah, it is pretty ridiculously funny. Specifically, that first jump scare when it smashes into the side of the boat and then just pulls zoop right back out with no realistic motion at all. It made me laugh.
Hey, Drew, shark don't go backward.
That's what I've been told. Deep Blue Sea told me that. But this is when they realize, like, oh, we have this shark here. We should capture it, because originally there's talk about trying to kill it. And Kay is the one dissenting voice saying, like, no, we should capture it and study it. We would be the only people to have a great white in captivity.
Yep. And of course, Fitzroyce, this foppish moron, is like, I want the photo opportunity of killing the little beast. Calvin Bouchard, of course, is like, ooh, yeah, that's a great idea. And Kay's like, no, we should keep the shark alive. And she manages to convince Calvin to keep it because it will bring in profits. And then Fitzroyce, of course, is like, oh, money. Yes, I know this. And he changes his tune.
Yes, but he does have one of my favorite lines where he says to Calvin, they die magnificently.
It's funny. That line pays off.
It does. I do think we can transition into our fin fact for the episode, because it's actually about why it's very unlikely you'll see a great white in an aquarium. There have been many attempts to house great whites in aquariums dating back to the 1970s. The most recent attempt was in 2016. The Okinawa Churaumi Aquarium in Japan housed an 11-and-a-half-year-old white shark for 3 days before it died. In fact, most great whites that were held in captivity died very shortly after their capture. Only the Monterey Bay Aquarium in California were able to display live white sharks, and those were always juveniles. They ended the program in 2011, and even then, the released sharks had injuries from bumping their snouts against the walls. And that's because great whites are pelagic fish, meaning that they need open ocean to roam and change their path for whatever reason they desire. When put in any kind of aquarium, their disorientation and the injuries they develop from bashing their most important sense organ against walls leads to death. It's also pretty hard to feed adult great whites since their diet consists mostly of larger mammals. Though, as we'll find out, the shark in Jaws 3 has plenty of mammals to chew on.
Plenty of larger mammals, lots of nice tourist-shaped and sized mammals.
Plenty of Shelby Overmans.
He's a real meaty, lean meal. A great white wouldn't really want that. He'd want something a little bit paunchier.
We'll get to just how meaty Overman is in a bit.
So they get this shark in captivity, this like 10-foot shark, and very shortly thereafter, Calvin Bouchard puts it on display without Kay's permission or, without notifying her. And then, of course, she rushes over when she hears the announcement on the PA, like, hey, we're showing off a great white shark, everybody. She rushes in, and I think Bess Armstrong sells this moment as legitimately sad.
The music's pretty good in that moment, too.
It works.
So, yes, the baby shark does die, and this is all happening during the opening celebration. And I think we have to get to what was kind of Travis's great revelation about this movie. Because during the opening of SeaWorld, there's this big ski show going on, and there's this team of skiers called the Silver Bullets.
Mm-hmm.
They are perfect 80s butch-looking guys. And there's a shot of them about to do a stunt, and they're high-fiving each other, and there's some ADR of them like, yeah, all right, awesome, do it.
Good job, man.
Yeah, all this. And suddenly, I started to see that Jaws 3 is pretty gay.
Pretty is an understatement. I mean, it starts getting real gay when Philip Fitzroy and his manservant Jack show up. Just Jack's costume, the way they relate to one another, his mustache, the way he carries his bag, it's just like instantly gay. I mean, very campy from the start. The entire park is festooned with these rainbow-colored streamers and flags. It's a choice. Maybe not a willing choice. This is maybe just like a whole bunch of things that added up to a very gay movie, but
I think this is Commando gay. Which, for anybody who doesn't know, go listen to our Genre Vision episode on Commando. There are certain things in the 80s that I don't think pop culture was as tuned into being gay. Like, the men in this movie in general are usually butch, shirtless, oiled, and mustached.
Right. Well, the early 80s was a resurgence of hypermasculinity in cinema. It's why we saw movies like Predator in the theaters, and that's why Predator did well. Like, there wasn't a whole lot of like girl power kind of cinema out at the time in the early 80s. It just wasn't popular. And that hypermasculinity teeters into camp so easily. There's such a fine line that hypermasculine stuff can ride before it just completely falls over into what we see in Jaws 3, which is, like I said, quite gay.
And where we'll go with Philip Fitzroy and Jack only, I think, cements it. I really think this needs to be recontextualized and done a deeper read of just how gay Jaws 3 is. But there's more to talk about. As this opening ceremony is going on, we get to go into the undersea kingdom, and we see that undersea spook house, which is so ridiculous, but I can't help but love it. And then we have a wonderful rule of threes example. A group of tourists is going up to these little portholes to look out into the lagoon and see, oh, look, there's some fish. So walk up to a porthole, see some fish, nothing happens. Oh, that was nice. Same thing again. Walk to another porthole, cut to it. Oh, yeah, nothing happens. Go to the third one. And up pops the corpse of Shelby Overman.
Mustache still gloriously intact. Thank you very much, Jaws 3D.
And my favorite part of this sequence is everybody freaks out and somebody pushes a little girl's face right up to the porthole so it's right next to Overman's face.
The close-up of her screaming with her face pushed up against the bubble while the ghoul on the other side is just leering at her. It's amazing.
It's so funny.
Now that Overman's corpse has been turned up, they can look at the corpse and figure out what's been going on.
This sequence where they're examining Overman's corpse, we get a ton of great shots. Dennis Quaid walks up, takes the sheet off his body, full in the frame, just his disgusting corpse with some blackish blood that seeps out of his mouth.
There's worms and stuff like that. There's like a big worm that crawls out of his mouth. Like there's a whole bunch of denuded muscle on his chest and denuded bone. It's a really ugly corpse in the best way.
And then Bess Armstrong, Kay, comes up and is like, if this is a shark attack, I've seen it before. And she rips the thing off and we get a full look at his corpse and he looks like a rack of lamb. This is where I feel the movie leans into its cartoonishness in the best of ways.
This is definitely the best stretch of Jaws 3.
Oh, for sure.
Because as soon as they figure out that Overman was killed by a shark, they measure the bite radius and they say, "Oh my God."
Bess Armstrong says, "Oh my God."
So they figure out that the shark that killed Overman is huge and definitely in the park. And so they race off to find Calvin Bouchard to tell him this stuff. And Calvin Bouchard is dining in the premier undersea restaurant at SeaWorld. It looks just like the restaurant at the Living Seas in Epcot.
Yeah.
I don't know if they shot it there or not, but there's definitely a real aquarium in those scenes. So just as Bess Armstrong and Dennis Quaid show up to tell Calvin Bouchard that they have a very big shark problem, the shark appears in the aquarium window. Ah!
This is when we find out that the real shark of the movie is the mother of the baby shark.
You talk about some damn shark's mother?
That's the line. I mean, I know we do a clean show on here, but there's no way we can't highlight the best line in the movie from Louis Gossett Jr. because Bess Armstrong says, "Our shark had all its teeth. That means it was still a baby. So our shark couldn't have killed Overman. It was its mother," to which Calvin Bouchard says, "You talking about some damn shark's mother?" So she explains that the mother is somewhere inside the park. Apparently, the mother shark, who is 35 feet in length, which is absurdly, unrecordedly huge for a shark.
I think this might be the biggest Bruce, actually. I think this might be the biggest thing they built for the movies in terms of animatronic sharks.
Well, and I'll say that, talking about the mindless eating machine again, that this big hero puppet that we see the most of, it's strange. It's technically a better shark than any of the previous Bruces, but it looks worse.
Yeah, it doesn't have the kind of signature face of the original Bruce. One thing they did manage to change about it is the fact that the upper jaw now detaches from the inside of the head and moves independently, just like a real shark. Mm-hmm. However, this shark also kind of roars.
It does.
It's not like a lion's roar. It's almost sort of a whooshing water sound, but it definitely comes off as like the shark roaring. And it also moves like this big, slow behemoth. There are a couple scenes where it gets stuck in a giant pipe, this huge diameter pipe that brings water in and out of the lagoon. And it coming in and out is just like this dopey, like Galapagos tortoise movement.
It's unfortunate because it's like, yeah, this is technically the best that we've ever seen in these movies, but the style, the design, the movement are just all wrong. And maybe that's also because of the way it's shot. It just doesn't work. But this is when the mama shark gets out and starts causing havoc in the park. And we get probably one of my favorite shots in the movie is we see another water ski show and the skiers are going across the frame. And as the camera pans, we see the dorsal fin in the foreground and it just pans by it. There's no musical sting or anything. And I was like, that is such I literally exclaimed aloud, "That's a good shot." And I think that just is indicative of how few good shots there are in Jaws 3.
It definitely leaves you wanting for better shots. Like the water skier stuff in Jaws 2 is better than this.
Oh, by far.
The only real impressive stuff about the water skiing thing in Jaws 3D is the fact that it's in 3D. Like I said before, the best 3D stuff is anytime the water skiers are on screen. That shot of the one silver bullet skier crashing through the big paper banner, that shot's dope in 3D. It looks great. It's goofy as all get out, but that's just the substance of the film.
But I wish Jaws 3D was even more shameless about its slasher nature, because even though the shark is going around causing fear and we're having the necessary get out of the water scene.
Oh God, Dennis Quaid pushes somebody out of the way and grabs a microphone and starts,
even though all this is going on, there's a real serious dearth of chomping during this section. Nobody in this stretch of the movie gets eaten, and that's kind of disappointing.
Yeah, this is the sort of mayhem moment where everybody is scrambling to get out of the water, and the only person who gets attacked is Lea Thompson's character. She gets munched on her thigh, and we get a close-up of the wound, but she's going to be fine.
That's about it. And unfortunately, this is the writing moment that really kind of confounds me and seems like an easy fix is There's also a sequence going on where the people in the Undersea Kingdom attraction are seeing the shark, in the lagoon coming at them, and it's attacking the tunnels and causing depressurization. So they have to close off all the tunnels. And these people, these tourists and a tour guide, get trapped in the Undersea Kingdom.
I think the proper term is randos.
Yes. And that's the thing. It's all randos. Why is it not Sean and Kellyanne stuck in there to give us a little bit more drama, because those are characters we know and we're supposed to care about.
Instead, the two of them get in an ambulance and they leave the movie. They decide all this is way too much for us. We're going to go to the hospital.
So, of course, everybody at the park freaks out. They have to evacuate the park. They're trying to patch the Undersea Kingdom where these people are caught so they can release them. But the shark's out there. So they're like, we have to try and trap the shark back in the filtration tube so that Michael and his team can go make this patch on the tunnel. So Fitzroyce gets the shark to come back into the filtration pipe and then, of course, gets stuck down there. And I think this is where we come to my best bite for the movie.
It's really the only good shark kill in the film.
There's another one.
Well, this scene abandons reality so completely. Even though, the stuff that's happening in the original Jaws and Jaws 2 isn't really indicative of reality. Yes, sharks are known to sometimes kill people extraordinarily rarely, but it doesn't look or happen like it happens in Jaws or Jaws 2. In Jaws 3, Philip Fitzroyce is sucked into the giant mouth of the mama shark and bounced around inside as if he is being chewed.
And we see this from the interior of the mouth.
I can't exactly say it's nicely shot because it takes place in the interior of a mouth of a giant shark, so it's very dark. But sharks' mouths aren't even really built to chew. Like this, just the premise alone of this very scene is so confounding that it has to be the best bite.
It's such a weird cartoon idea to be like, let's have a kill where we see inside the shark's mouth where there's these pieces of what look like, I don't know, stretched rubber acting as the bottom and the top of the shark's gullet, and that's crushing Fitzroyce. It's such a strange goofball idea that I can't help but love it. This also leads to Philip Fitzroyce's companion, Jack, sobbing while telling Philip that he should use one of his grenades that he had. Of course, we had these grenades set up earlier. And he just keeps yelling, pull the pin, Philip.
If you don't have the subtitles on, it's like...
But yeah, so now Philip Fitzroyce's body is just hanging out in the mouth of the shark, and that will come back later.
Weirdly, because the shark swallows other people while Fitzroyce is just hanging out and they're dead.
Yes, well, we'll get to that. Anyways, so eventually this leads to the shark is able to escape while Michael and them are still making the patch. They get the patch, they get everybody evacuated, they go down to the control center. And this is where we get the shot that the entire movie was formed around.
This being Jaws 3D, they had to have some sort of really big mission statement about the shark coming out at the audience. And they couldn't do, like what happened at the end of Jaws, where the shark sort of bursts into the pilot house of the sinking orca right at the camera. They wanted to do something with a lot more Star Wars grandeur. After all, this came out in the same year as Return of the Jedi. You'd think with blockbuster money that they could do a better job at this shot.
Well, I'll say this. The model that they use for this shark doesn't look like the larger hero shark at all.
Nope.
It looks closer to a Bruce model.
Yeah, it's actually not a bad looking shark. So it gets closer and closer and closer to the big window in this underwater control center. And you get reaction shots from everybody down there. So that's Calvin Bouchard, his nephew, weirdly enough, another woman, Dennis Quaid, and Bess Armstrong. They're all looking out at this shark like, oh no.
And everything cuts down to slow motion, and Dennis Quaid goes, oh, shit. And then they have that awful 80s 3D glass breaking effect that Friday the 13th reused and all that stuff.
And then a load of water pours into this control center.
It's impressive.
Drew and I are always suckers for submerged sets and like sets where they just dump a ton of water in there. That just always looks great on film.
Yes. So there's this whole submerged set, and Calvin Bouchard, who has been the person who is he's our Mayor Vaughn of this movie. he seems like he's set up now. He's in this flooded room. He's going to get the big comeuppance death like you would in a normal slasher movie. Instead, his nephew, who we only find out is his nephew in like one line of dialogue, maybe 5 minutes earlier.
When he calls him nephew.
Yes.
Who knows? Maybe the guy's name is actually just nephew. Hi, I'm Mike Nephew.
But the nephew ends up being the one who gets eaten by the shark in this sequence, and it's pretty good.
Yeah, the body that they shove at this shark, you see it get munched, like actively munched, and there's like blood pouring out of it, and you hear his underwater screams.
I mean, this is still in the pre-PG-13 days. And for a PG-rated movie at the time, it's really bloody and nasty the way this guy dies.
Particularly just seeing the shot linger on the shark. Like, it really just holds for a long time. Just like, most everything in this movie, they let shots last a long time. And seeing it in that great detail is kind of alarming. And then we get the
earth-shattering kaboom!
I think this is the most transcendent thing about this movie. Fitzroyce's body is still in there, and his hand is holding on to one of the grenades.
This scene is so surreal. Like, Dennis Quaid is trying to reach into this enormous shark's mouth. This enormous shark, by the way, a real shark can thrash around and move really quickly. This thing's just like, it's so slow.
The Eeyore of giant sharks.
Bess Armstrong swims to the other side of the shark's head and is literally like hitting it with her open flat palm. Stop it, shark.
So Michael gets a little hook or whatever, sticks it in the shark's mouth, and is able to pull the pin. And the shark explodes, and its viscera just hurls towards the screen, ending on the set of Jaws, just floating right up to the screen and kind of slightly chomping a bit.
This, to pardon the pun, has entered an entire new dimension. Like, this is just a really different riff on this whole idea.
That is legit wonderful cheese. So the shark viscera explodes. It's incredible. Like, it's way gorier than anything in a Friday the 13th movie, but it's so cartoonish and it's not a human. But then we didn't talk about a pair of the most important characters in Jaws 3.
Excuse me, mammals.
That's right. Cindy and Sandy, the dolphins. I hate these dolphins.
I'm ambivalent towards the dolphins.
I hate them.
There are a couple scenes. Well, I think there's one scene where they save Bess Armstrong and Dennis Quaid's characters from getting munched by the shark after it breaks out of the pipe for the second time.
There's also a moment where one of them comes up to them and is literally shaking its head no, telling them, like, no, get out of here.
Dennis Quaid is just about to ask it, is Timmy down the well?
Right. So these dolphins at one point during the climax are attacking the shark so Michael and Kay can escape. And the way that it's shot, it looks like the shark kills one of them. So during this ending, after the shark's blown up and Michael and Kay swim to the surface, Kay starts slapping the water like, Sandy, are you okay? One of them comes up. It's like, oh, yay, that's wonderful. But what about Sandy? Is Sandy still here? And then Sandy comes up and they're like, yes. And then we get the closing shot of Jaws 3.
Oh, the perfect freeze frame ending. Dennis Quaid and Bess Armstrong in the water. The sun is rising beautifully behind them. The golden light is dancing off the rippling surface of the lagoon. And then there are two composited yellow dolphins on either side of the frame as Bess Armstrong cries triumphantly, yes!
And freeze frame. And of course, it's one dolphin that's been mirrored.
Yeah. It's like a Lisa Frank notebook cover.
So yes, that closes out this ridiculousness. And I think if you listen to our conversation, there's a lot of fun to be had in Jaws 3D, but the majority of the actual movie is pretty dull.
Our sort of mission statement at the beginning was to see, like, is it actually fun to talk about Jaws 3D? Yeah, it's really fun to talk about Jaws 3D, especially with you, my friend.
Of course.
And we're happy to have you all here back with us at FinFlix talking about Jaws 3D, but it's way more fun to talk about Jaws 3D than it is to watch Jaws 3D.
Yes.
And that's a problem.
It is a problem. And when we come to sink or swim, I have to say that Jaws 3D probably sinks. The stuff that I like about it when it's embracing how dumb it knows it is, because it's not an unaware movie, I think, a lot of times.
No, there's this scene where like Dennis Quaid drives off in a golf cart that has like a bunch of popcorn on the rear of it, and all the popcorn falls off, and then this like swarm of kids swoops in to eat all the popcorn. It's really stupid and dumb, but it's a funny gag. Like the movie has a few tricks up its sleeve, but like you said, it's a really dull movie.
It's a real slog for a lot of its running time. And that's why when we entered that stretch that we talked about, and it's like, this is it, like this is what the whole movie was worth it for. It feels really good. And the final climactic stuff got a smile out of me, but I think it's too little too late.
I think we did the best job we could to celebrate the film today. And I'm glad we did so, because there are elements worth celebrating in Jaws 3D, but it's certainly not essential shark cinema.
I feel that the entire Jaws franchise is essential shark cinema because they're, in a way, all doing very different things. And Jaws 3 really is the outlier in the entire franchise. It's the one that gets the least amount of discussion. I wish that there was much more written about the production and pre-production of this. I put out on Twitter that I want full feature-length documentaries on this and Jaws the Revenge, because I think they're worth it.
I think you and me and the FinFlix listeners might be the only people who demand that sort of thing.
I think Jaws the Revenge has such a legacy that people would be interested in that. But Jaws 3 is the one I'm actually more interested in. Jaws 3.
It seems like a greater technical challenge, you know, with all the 3D stuff and multiple sharks and shooting it at SeaWorld. It seems like there's an interesting story that happened there. And then plus all the behind the scenes stuff. Like, I want to know.
And its position in the history of the franchise, where it was the first one that did something radically different from the movies that came before. It clearly did not work. And then they had to go back, and they thought they were going back with Jaws the Revenge to something that felt more familiar, more like the Jaws you used to know. I appreciate Jaws 3 for going out of the box. Even if it was for completely commercial reasons, it goes outside the box. I just wish it leaned into those elements all the way through instead of giving us really no interesting characters. And like you said, it's not a very nice movie to look at for the most part.
It is the signal of a decline in Jaws. Like Jaws 2, you know, certainly I think exists on a lower rung than the original, but it gets so close at replicating so many elements from the original and does a fairly good job of it. This, however, is a departure. And I think that reflects thematically what we're going to do for the rest of this season.
We're so glad that you've joined us for our season 2 premiere. It's incredibly exciting for us because, like Travis says, this premiere is in some ways a farewell.
It's a departure. It's a farewell to the safety and the familiarity of Amity Harbor. Now we're casting off and setting sail for deeper waters in search of a wider variety of aquatic horror.
As much as we love Jaws, our goal for this season of FinFlix is to leave it behind. It's still our home port. It's a bright beacon on dark seas, but now we're navigating by starlight. And it's dangerous out here in deeper waters. But we're glad to have you aboard.
You know, speaking of deeper waters, have you heard of the Philippine Trench? It's just east of the Philippines and contains the third deepest point in the world that we know of. I shudder to think what lurks in those depths, but we're going to find out. You see, we've set a course for the 1955 classic, It Came From Beneath the Sea. We'll arrive there next time, right here on FinFlix.
The easiest way to get that next episode of FinFlix is to subscribe. You can subscribe for free on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Overcast, or pretty much anywhere podcasts are found. But there is a better option.
If you want to hear the episodes early, uncut, and uncensored, go to bit.ly/FinFlixPremium. This will take you to our Patreon page, and for only $2 a month, you can access exclusive goodies from FinFlix Seasons 1 and 2. Again, that's bit.ly/FinFlixPremium.
FinFlix is part of the GenreVision network of podcasts. For more great podcasts from us, visit genrevision.com. Follow us on Twitter @FinFlix and @GenreVisionPod.
FinFlix is written and produced by Drew Deach and Travis Newton. The FinFlix theme song was written and recorded by Drew Deach and Travis Newton. FinFlix is a labor of love. We share that labor together as friends, and it would mean the world to us if you told one of your friends about FinFlix. Thanks for listening.
Feeling good.